Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending the 2021 Kansas Ornithological Society Fall Meeting. Today you'll be listening to my talk, Shedding Light on Migration Mortalities, New Research Underway at New Mexico State University. So my name is Dylan Osterhaus. I am a new PhD student at New Mexico State University. Some of you may recognize me from birding around Kansas because I'm originally from Topeka, Kansas, and really got into birding in my last couple of years in the state. So this research will be conducted in collaboration with a variety of individuals and entities, including people from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, White Sands Missile Range, Colorado State University, and New Mexico State University. So we'll start with a little bit of background as to what has led to my PhD research here at New Mexico State. So first, I want to talk about avian migration. So bird migration is perhaps one of those amazing, incredible feats of any sort of animal movements in the world. Tiny birds like Blackburnian warblers are flying from Canada clear down to South America and back twice a year. Now, on any given night in the U.S. during migration, we could see up to or over 500 million birds migrating across our country at any time. And we can see this using some pretty amazing technology called Next-Rad Weather Radar, which can show us the amount of bird traffic that's going over our country at any given point. During these migratory flights, birds rely on a variety of cues in order to lead the way. One of these is light. Now, this can be an issue on nights with bad weather or low visibility, as birds may become attracted to anthropogenically produced light rather than the light of the stars that they're supposed to be following. So in a study by Van Doorn et al., they looked at one huge light in particular, which was the tribute light at the World Trade Center, and they found that thousands and thousands of birds are being attracted and then entrapped in this beam of light each night. And this combined effect of these anthropogenically produced lights that are attracting birds and bad weather have been blamed in a variety of mass migration mortality events in the last couple of years. So as recently as early in September this month, there was a huge migration mortality event that occurred in New York City. And on this night, there were periods of bad weather, which forced birds lower in their migration flights. And then these birds became attracted to the light and ended up running into many of the New York City skyscrapers, with hundreds found at the World Trade Center site alone. Now, in New Mexico last fall, we also experienced a huge migration mortality event, and hundreds of these birds were found clustered near buildings that have lights on at night. So many questions have been asked as to what led or contributed to the mass migration mortality event that we experienced in our region last fall. And a few of these questions are what I'll be pursuing as part of my PhD research here at New Mexico State. So first, are these relatively small lights that we have here in the desert influencing bird migration? So in comparison to the huge tribute light at the World Trade Center, the points of light where birds were found clustered during the migration event last fall are relatively small. So these are single buildings that are lit with large floodlights in an otherwise dark desert. So are these relatively small amounts of lights influencing bird migration in the same way as one big light? Also, is there a difference between light types in terms of the impact that it has on bird migration? And is there any importance as to the amount of light at a site, or is it just the fact that the site has light versus dark? And then does the surrounding habitat around the site have any impact on the number of birds that could be attracted to the light? So is there any interrelationship between the reflectivity of the desert sand versus maybe a more green grassy environment? And then finally, what types of weather influence the attraction to light? Is it simply just dark, stormy nights, or maybe perhaps wind can contribute to these migration events where birds become attracted to lights? So to answer these questions and begin disentangling the effects of light pollution and severe weather on bird migrations, I will be studying over 50 sites down in south central New Mexico in the Tularosa Basin. So these sites, which half will be lighted sites and then half will be dark sites, are located across 250 square miles of the Tularosa Basin on the White Sands Missile Range. So the primary habitat in this area is low elevation desert scrub. However, a portion of my sites will be located on the White Sands Main Post, which is a small urban community that is used as housing for people who work on the missile range, and is more typical of a town rather than the rest of the lighted sites, which are just diffuse points of light spread out in the desert. So while birds are migrating, many are making flight calls as they fly overhead. So if you were to walk out in the dark some night during migration, you could hear many birds flying overhead just making single flight calls as they go. So our goal is to monitor the amount of these flight calls and then use this as a metric of comparing the amount of activity or the amount of attraction of birds to lighted sites versus dark sites. To do this, we will be making nocturnal recordings at each of our sites using autonomous recording units, and specifically the Wildlife Acoustics Song Meter Micro. These recordings will take place from approximately an hour and a half after sundown to an hour and a half before sunrise. And we will be recording from September 1st through the end of fall migration, which in our area is about the end of October, middle of November. It's important to note that these recording units have a relatively small effective range, and it's actually pretty similar to the human ear and the distance that they can hear a flight call. So a bird will have to be pretty close to the source of light that we have at the site in order for its flight call to be picked up by the recorders. So here's an example of the types of data that will be taken with these recorders, and we'll see if you can hear these flight calls. That may be somewhat tough to hear on your computer speakers. However, there are 5 different flight calls in this one little 11-second segment. And each of these flight calls is unique to a different bird. And some of these can be identified to species, but we'll be mostly relying on the amount of flight calls per unit time or the acoustic energy through this entire band of frequencies throughout the duration of the night. So we will be recording approximately 25,000 hours of these nocturnal flight calls per season. So with that much data, it would take one person about 8.5 years to sort through all this data at the rate of 8 hours a day. So because of this, we'll be relying heavily on the Raven sound analysis software in order to generate metrics such as the number of flight calls per unit time and the amount of acoustic energy included in these recordings. So that's a measure of the amount of acoustic activity that's occurring between a set frequency range. So for us, that would be 6 to 9 kilohertz, as this is where the majority of flight calls fall. This data will allow us to make a variety of comparisons between lighted and dark sites, as well as between sites that have different types of lighting, which includes LED, high pressure sodium, and metal halide lights. And then also, we'll be able to examine specific nights where weather patterns could have contributed to issues with bird migration. So for instance, this is a radar screenshot from a few nights ago here in Las Cruces, where we had a small storm system push through our area from the south to the north, containing winds that were also coming from the south. And this storm system pushed into an area where there were still winds and likely a lot of birds migrating from the north to the south. So we're interested to see if this conflict of winds and migration direction could have had an impact on bird migration on this night. So how does this research down in New Mexico apply to the state of Kansas? Well, Kansas and New Mexico are a lot alike in terms of the types of lights that they have throughout the state. In Kansas, just like in New Mexico, we have a few large cities, but then most of our light is somewhat diffuse in an otherwise dark environment. So if my research determines that these diffuse points of light are generating an impact on bird migration, then this could help to guide lights out campaigns to target these areas that are issues. Also, if we find that specific weather patterns are influencing bird migration and attraction to light more heavily than others, this could also help guide those lights out campaigns to be more targeted to specific nights during migration. Finally, if we determine that specific types of light, for instance LEDs, are having a greater impact on bird migration than others, we can recommend that these sorts of lights are not implemented in a way that they would be as detrimental to bird migration. So we could replace some of these bad lights with more ecologically bird-friendly lights in the future. With that, I would like to thank you all for attending this virtual conference and specifically my talk. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. Or if you would like to, please email them to me at dylano@nmsu.edu and I'll be sure to get back with you. Thank you.